In Dublin's fair city, where the girls are so pretty, I first set my eyes on sweet Molly Malone.
Hello, my name is Tom Davis, and welcome back to the Davis Family History video series. For anyone from Dublin, or even anyone who has visited Dublin, they will instantly recognise the song Molly Malone, which has become the anthem for Dublin City. But what was Dublin City really like at the start of the 1900s for the many branches of the Davis family who lived there? When the Irish Parliament was disbanded following the failed Irish Rebellion of 1798, the wealthier classes with no parliamentary duties to perform gradually moved from Dublin to London, leaving large sections of Georgian Dublin unoccupied. These grand houses were left abandoned as they were too large and expensive for single families to afford, and soon fell into a state of disrepair. The Great Irish Famine, or in Irish An Gcoirte Mór, meaning the Great Hunger, occurred between 1845 and 1849. During this period, the potato crop failed due to potato blight, which meant that the potatoes rotted in the ground. As the potato formed a very large part of the Irish diet at this time, around 1 million people died from starvation, and 1 million more emigrated, causing Ireland's population to fall by roughly 25%. The famine also resulted in a movement of people from rural areas into cities like Dublin, seeking paid work in order to feed their families. The Davis family from Portrane were not immune to these events, and many members of the family either moved into Dublin City or emigrated to America or England around this time. Obviously, the influx of large numbers of families into Dublin City gave rise to a sharp increase in the demand for affordable accommodation. As the demand for affordable housing increased, landlords saw an opportunity for profit and rented out individual rooms in the old run-down Georgian houses to the influx of workers' families. The houses, having been unoccupied for a long period, were in poor condition, and no effort was made to repair them before they were offered for rent. The typical Georgian house would have 3 or 4 floors plus a basement. When these houses were converted into tenements, each floor was typically divided into 2, with front and back rooms. The single room served as living room, kitchen and bedroom for whole families. Families were large. 36% of married women in the 1911 census had 7 children or more, so you could have anywhere between 2 and 14 people to a family. Heating and cooking was provided by a single open fireplace in each room. The entrance to all tenement houses was by a common front door off the street, lane or alleyway, and in most cases the door was never shut, day or night, summer or winter. The halls and stairs were common, and the rooms all opened directly, either onto a hall or a landing. Most of the houses had yards at the back, some of which were of fair size, while others were very small. Generally, the only water supply for the house was provided by a single water tap which was located in the yard. The yard was also the location of the single outdoor toilet which was shared by everyone living in the house. These houses were to become the tenement slums of Dublin, with 7 or 8 rooms, each housing a single family, with perhaps 60 to 70 people living in the house in total. The main tenement areas in Dublin were around the quays, but also extended over the River Liffey into the area around Christchurch and the Liberties. The Davis family mainly lived in the area of the quays on the north side of the city, in places such as Pill Lane, Fisher's Lane, East Arran Street, Charles Street, Chancery Street, Greek Street, Cross Lane and Cherry Lane. Living in these overcrowded and poor living conditions created a real risk of disease, and infectious diseases spread fast in the cramped conditions. Tuberculosis, also known as TB, was the biggest health threat, killing more than 12,000 people a year nationally in Ireland in the early 1900s. Many of these were in Dublin, where the disease spread easily through the overcrowded tenements. Other diseases were common in Dublin at the time and included typhoid, dysentery, cholera, whooping cough, influenza, smallpox and measles. The spread of these diseases was mainly due to overcrowding, unsanitary living conditions, poor nutrition and lack of hygiene. The death rate in Dublin in the early 1900s was 23.3 deaths per thousand, as compared with London, which was just 15.6. In particular, childbirth was life-threatening for both mothers and babies. Babies born in urban areas were twice as vulnerable as those born in rural areas. The urban infant mortality rate was 150 deaths per thousand live births, while in rural areas it was just 74 per thousand. In the period 1878 to 1899, 152 people were born in Dublin North City with the surname Davis, many of whom were our direct ancestors. Of these, 52 would die before the age of 10. Another 14 would die before they were 20. This means that 43% of the Davises would not even reach adulthood. Even when they made it into adulthood, the life expectancy in 1911 was only 54 years for Irish men and women. These are frightening statistics and perhaps explain why so many emigrated in the search for a better life. The real turning point for the Dublin tenements came on the evening of Tuesday the 2nd of September 1913 at about 8:45 in the evening. As dusk approached, a rumbling noise was heard in two tenement houses, number 66 and 67 on Church Street. Within minutes, number 66, a four-storey tenement house collapsed, followed soon after by number 67. The rubble fell across the width of Church Street as far as the door of the Father Matthew Hall on the other side of the street. The search and rescue effort continued into the early hours of the morning. It was led by units from the Dorset Street and Tara Street fire brigades, along with about 50 Dublin Corporation employees who, armed with picks, shovels and crowbars, began the laborious work of clearing away the amassed rubble. 7 people, including 3 children from number 66, were killed, and scores of others were injured from both houses, some of whom were trapped in the debris and left with serious lifelong injuries. The incident caused significant public outcry in Dublin, and an inquiry was called to look into the cause of the tragedy. The Dublin Housing Inquiry was charged with examining the housing conditions of the working classes in Dublin. Its findings, published on the 7th of February 1914, presented a picture of appalling poverty in the tenement areas of Dublin. I quote from the report itself. Having visited a large number of these houses in all parts of the city, we have no hesitation in saying that it is no uncommon thing to find halls, landings, yards and toilets of the houses in a filthy condition. The findings of the inquiry were particularly damning and caused a lot of controversy in Dublin at the time. The main findings of the inquiry were that the rents charged for accommodation in the tenement houses were excessive for the class of accommodation provided. The inquiry also found that Dublin Corporation did actually have the necessary legal powers under the Housing of the Working Class Acts 1890 and 1908 to deal with the overcrowding and unsanitary conditions in the Dublin tenements. However, they also found that there was no systematic or comprehensive inspection programme of dangerous buildings in the Dublin City area. There was also a lack of firm administration by the Dublin City Corporation in enforcing responsibility on landlords for the condition of the housing they provided. So why did Dublin Corporation not act? Well, the inquiry found that 16 sitting members of Dublin Corporation, including 3 aldermen and a councillor, were actually owners and landlords of tenement houses in Dublin. Each one owned several houses in the city that were unfit for human habitation, but where people were actually living. Some had no water, and in others the drains were not working properly. It was clear that Dublin Corporation members intervened to frustrate the enforcement of regulations against their own and other landlords' properties. Indeed, the chairman of Dublin City Corporation overruled on numerous occasions recommendations made by his own health and building inspectors. The basis for his decision was that if they closed the tenements, there would be hundreds of homeless families on the streets of Dublin, and this would only make the situation worse. The inquiry did acknowledge that Dublin City Corporation had initiated a number of new housing projects in the city, in Lisburn Street, Lurgan Street, Trinity Ward, Bereford Street, Church Street and Ormond Market. But the inquiry were of the opinion that these schemes were too small and localised in nature to have had any real impact. The inquiry also found that in building these small schemes, Dublin City Corporation had paid excessive amounts for land. They cited the case of an independent company buying land to build houses for their workers and paying £1,857 for this land. Dublin Corporation bought a similar size piece of land in the same area at the same time and paid £10,000 for it. The inquiry recommended the following: that new housing construction by Dublin Corporation needed to be pushed out into the open areas on the outskirts of Dublin City. A programme of large-scale public housing development needed to be started with a view to move families from the tenement houses in the city centre to more suitable accommodation, and that the vacated tenements should either be restored or demolished. The new houses should have ample living space, a separate kitchen, its own water supply, its own toilet and its own entrance. They also recommended changes in the arbitration process in terms of purchasing land for social housing, and recommended that the corporation should pursue compulsory purchase orders in certain cases. However, Ireland was heading into difficult times at this point in history. The 1913-1914 lockout was happening at this time. The rise of trade unionism had begun. The 1916 Rising was about to happen, and ultimately the Irish Civil War. So the recommendations were effectively put on hold. However, once the new Irish state was formed, the recommendations of the building inquiry started to be implemented. The Dublin city boundaries were extended in the 1920s, and the new large-scale public housing projects were started in Dublin City, on the south side in Crumlin and on the north side in Drumcondra, Cabra and Marino. Through the 1920s and 1930s, families from the tenement houses in the city centre were moved out to their new homes, which gave them more rooms, their own running water, their own indoor toilet, a garden and, most prized of all, their own front door. But much more, it gave them dignity and hope for the future. As I mentioned in previous videos, the work of Dr. Kathleen Lynn and our own Bridget Davis with the creation of St Ultan's Children's Hospital and the improvements in medical care helped reduce the outbreak of disease and increase the life expectancy. You can clearly see that life was hard for our ancestors in Dublin in the early 1900s, and it is a credit to them all that we are here to bear witness to the sacrifices they made and the foundations they laid for all our futures. We should remember them with pride and thank them for making our current lives possible, whether here in Ireland, in America, in England or Australia. Well, that's all for now. Thank you for watching another story from the Davis Family History video series. Goodbye for now. Slán leat.